Presented by Caltech.
Caltech is a jewel of American higher education. It's a source of transformative discovery for the world. And we have the privilege and, may I say, obligation to secure its future. And I want to talk today about how to think about the next decade and the kind of interventions that are necessary in which we can successfully achieve a rosy, a bright future for the California Institute of Technology. It is a long, arduous process in a lot of ways, an exciting one, but one that will evolve and change. And I want to emphasize that we're now at a stage where a lot of the ideas have coalesced, but there's still plenty of opportunity to modify, revise, add. And I very much hope that you'll be part of that process. I'm not talking about that campaign specifically, and I want to be clear about that. There's been a lot of activity in the divisions and the provost leading those sorts of discussions with the faculty with long lists, which you've seen. And those are very much part of the campaign. And they cover lots of different areas of need and opportunity in all the divisions. What I want to do today is talk more about the context of a campaign. How do we think about this at a high level? And what are the areas where Caltech has an opportunity to dominate? And what are the kind of institutional interventions that will make a difference? So this is a quote from John Milton: "No institution which does not continually test its ideals, techniques, and measure of accomplishments can claim real vitality." It is, in fact, an institute here that has been very intentional about its success. And any success is predicated upon a firm basis of values. And so everything we're going to talk about now has to flow from the values of the Institute that have made sure that we are the kind of place that we are. As you may remember at my inauguration talk, I tried to identify aspects of Caltech that I thought were special and had led to this historical resonance. And I talked about 5 there, and I want to pick out 3 in particular to talk about in terms of the campaign. The first is excellence. That is the hope to recruit and retain the most creative and original scholars. The second is ambition, intellectual fearlessness to define new schools of thought. We don't do just incremental things, although they're valuable. The real payoff is to think about things in a different way and to set out in new directions where you're leading and other places follow. And finally, perspective, connecting the disciplines to impact society and to transform the world. We are in the business of creating knowledge for the centuries. We are also sometimes involved in projects and have ideas that can change the world tomorrow. And it's the marrying of those 2 types of approaches that I think are so powerful at Caltech. In excellence, I think that Murph Goldberger captured this beautifully when he talked about the impact here. He said what makes Caltech special is its absolute unwillingness to compromise on excellence. Excellence of faculty, excellence of students, excellence of facilities. So let me talk about 5 interventions here that I feel and I hope will make Caltech an even more special place than it is today as we move forward. And this involves diversity and inclusion, the undergraduate experience, graduate fellowships, laboratory instruments to transform science, and what I'm calling New Horizons Awards, which we'll discuss in a little more detail. I start with diversity because I think it's extremely important to make sure that this lies at the heart of what we do as an institute. We are in the business of recruiting absolutely the best people. What that means is we have to be a destination for people no matter their background, no matter their perspective. If we're not successful in that, we are not successful in our ultimate aim, which is being the place that the most original and creative people come. So we need to be that destination of choice. This is a central part of our value system. It's not an add-on, but it is difficult. It is difficult to do, and it requires a persistent, capacious approach year after year at every level: undergraduate, graduate, postdoc, faculty, and staff levels. So I don't have the time here to talk about all those types of interventions, but I do want to pick out a couple of them here just to talk about them, and then really summarize in terms of, I think, the attitude we need to be successful in this sphere. So the first I want to talk about are presidential career enhancement postdoctoral scholars. The notion here is that what you often see in academia is you move one member from Princeton, say an African-American faculty member, very distinguished, to Harvard. Or you'll take someone from Stanford and you'll move them to Berkeley. And we do that in part, and we do that, and we will continue to do that in the sense that they're people whose particular talents will be brought out by the Caltech atmosphere and who can contribute especially well here. Then we have an obligation to go after them. That's our job. We're collecting, if you will, this incredible slate of people. But we don't do much for the world of higher education in that fashion. So the hope is here, how do we intervene a little earlier as we think about the faculty and the role models there? And one thing is to try to identify people earlier, post-PhD, but early enough that they're not quite prepared for professorships. Caltech is not the kind of place where you're going to hire somebody as a postdoc and promise a professorship, but with the appropriate career guidance and introductions and experience, you can imagine a situation where we have the right of first refusal, if you will. And if those people join our faculty, great, but if they don't, well, then they're going out into the world and helping the world of higher education in a supplemental sense. The second point I want to make is that in a small place like Caltech, any particular unit often does not have critical mass of individuals. And people need community, as we all know. And so you have to think about this in an institute-wide approach. And in that way, the Diversity Center is supposed to act as a fulcrum where you bring together individuals, whether they be undergraduates, graduate staff, so on and so forth, in a way that you collect across the university to create community. And the Diversity Center, I think, is quite good, but it is under-resourced and needs to be endowed. In the more general sense, so these are just a couple of examples of the kinds of things we can do in the campaign. In the most general sense, what I want to say is that although I think Caltech is reasonably good in terms of thinking about these issues, we don't celebrate them. And we really have to celebrate diversity as a fundamental aspect of what we're doing if we're going to be successful. And that is part of a cultural change that is driven by a whole number of different interventions. Okay, let me talk about the undergraduate experience. The goals here are to house all our students on campus all 4 years. This is both an academic imperative, it seems to me, as well as a community imperative in terms of the student experience. As you know, we're about 200 beds short right now, and students move on and off campus. What this takes is a new house, and we have money for the Bechtel house, and we will go ahead with that. But it's also, as you know, to competitive facilities. So building that one additional residence is good, but we also need to either renovate the north houses or tear them down and replace them. And at that point, we'll be in a reasonable situation in terms of collecting all our students on campus for all 4 years. I'd like to see us be in a position where we can eliminate student loans. It's not that the loan burden is actually that high. The loan burden is about $15,000 per student for students who have loans, but it is an incredible barrier to a number of students. The notion of having to borrow, particularly for students of lower incomes, can sometimes be a barrier which prevents them from applying to Caltech, even though with our financial aid, we can be much cheaper than a state institution. But if we could be in the financial position to do this, then we would be able to be more competitive across the socioeconomic spectrum. Support a broad range of student career choices. We as faculty are very good at placing our students on academic pathways. I mean, it's where we are and where we have our contacts. But we know that we provide quantitative skills for our students that can be employed for the service of society in many different ways. And we also know that our students are choosing to go in many different ways. So 40% of students that have double majors are majoring in business, economics, and management. So it is a imperative, I think, for us to be in a position to provide the support, the internships, the experience to allow our students to successfully adapt their skills to whatever direction they find most fascinating. The last point that I want to make was about elevating the teaching profile. I had a series of lunches on the summer with various faculty members just asking about what's going on at Caltech, where could we be better, embedding this in the notion of a campaign to come. And frankly, to my surprise, the notion of teaching came up on most of the occasions. So there are a subset of faculty who do this very well. We provide some good support, but it's not integrated throughout the institute in ways that I think we can, and there's support that we can provide to help in this area. And the notion, of course, is to enhance our intellectual and social community, and again, to make sure that we're getting absolutely the best talent at every level here. Okay, so mechanisms. I've talked about some. Build a new residence hall and renovate the older ones that we have. Endow financial aid. Right now, we are need blind, and we are supporting it by endowment, but in a few years, a lot of those will run out and will come out of general budget unless we can provide support. I'd like to see us increasing support of international students to enhance our global profile. Right now, we're need blind for a certain subset of international students, and then those additional students are not done on a need blind basis. Obviously, we'd like to be in the position of attracting and supporting absolutely the best students as we define them, as we find them. Expand internships, career placement networks. Our alums can be extremely helpful in this arena. Endow the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Outreach. This is both for graduate students and faculty members in terms of thinking about good ways to teach, but also how do we bring new technology into the classrooms, flipped classrooms, and so on and so forth. And my last point, suggestion here, is the so-called Millikan Lecture Society, or put your name there, you being the donor. And the idea here is that in a number of areas where there's large student demand for courses, but we're not hiring faculty at the rate to match that, we hire lecturers. This is particularly true in math, computer science, humanities, but they tend to be one-offs. And so the hope is, again, how do you create a community of scholars here where you would have a cohesive group, this lecturer society, who would interact. We'd be able to raise the level and be more competitive in terms of attracting this sort of talent, and then send them out into the world to do great things at other universities. Graduate fellowships. So the notion here is to put Caltech in a position where it sticks out from the competition in a good way by supporting, funding every graduate fellowship at the Institute. In this way, no matter the vicissitudes of federal funding, no matter if you come in as a student and you say, oh, I wanted to work in biophysics, but actually I'm switching to electrical engineering, it's fine. You can follow your nose in terms of where you want to go without worrying that you have to find somebody to support you. This has two effects. One, it makes us more competitive in terms of attracting students. The other is there is a tight connection between your ability to recruit faculty and your ability and the quality of your graduate students. So the better your graduate students, the easier it is to get faculty that you want, and there's this virtuous circle, because of course then you improve the faculty base that attracts better graduate students and so on and so forth. Now, this is highly ambitious, and it's a lot of money. It would take about $700 million in endowment. Right now, this is for 1,250 graduate students. Right now, we support 30 to 40% of our students already on endowments. This would be an additional amount, but it's not a crazy amount of money that you could, I mean, you can actually imagine this. So if you're in a much bigger place, we're getting there. If you're in a much bigger place, you'd be at numbers of many billions of dollars that just aren't tractable. But we can do this. And in fact, we're already making progress, as it'll come out officially, and a lot of you know already. We already have an extremely generous gift from Gordon and Betty Moore towards this end, which will be a matching fund. And if we get the whole match, we'll be up to about 40% of this goal. So we're going on our way, and I think this can really transform the Institute in a wonderful way. Laboratory instrumentation. So here I'm not talking about large telescopes, although we need to build large telescopes. I'm talking about cutting-edge instrumentation that's hands-on. And this has really been a paradigm for breakthroughs for Caltech. We invent instruments, we buy instruments, we develop new types of instruments that allow us to query nature in different ways. But this is a very expensive enterprise. It's very hard, in fact, to continually update what you're doing. It's hard to even keep what you have operational. Service contracts are roughly 10% of the price of the instrument. Technicians are hard to fund in other ways. New computer facilities are always falling behind, and scientific computation has become more and more important. So the hope here is to create an endowment which will spin off something like $10 million per year, which you would have competitively filled across the Institute. Finally, in the category of excellence, let me talk about New Horizons Awards. The notion here is that we have an environment where we encourage people to interact and to always think of new ideas and new directions. So you can start as a biologist and you wind up talking to a chemist and you wind up doing something completely different. However, it's very hard to get funding to keep a new direction going cold, when you don't have credentials, when you don't have product, if you will, accomplishment. And so the idea is to create the funds for faculty members and their research groups at all stages of career, where if you want to shift, you get the seed monies, which let you do proof of principle, and then you establish a track record, and you can spin it off into federal funding. And so this is an award to position faculty for reinvention and outside funding. And again, this would be an endowment that would be competed across the Institute. Okay, let me switch now to the second category, which is ambition. Richard Feynman captured it very nicely. I would rather have questions that can't be answered. So we all know that questions are in fact far more interesting than the answers. And good questions lead on to other questions, and you keep going. They have a power that does not lie in the answer, as Elie Wiesel was quoted as saying. So in this, I'd like to talk about 5 interventions here: an intellectual venture fund, science and human health, the Quantum Science Institute, next generation leadership in observational astronomy, and the seismological observatory. And I do want to be clear that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of the kinds of interventions we're going to make. We do have exhaustive lists. But I've picked out some examples where I think Caltech just dominate and also represent the cross-disciplinary interactions and talents that can be brought to bear that are done especially well at the Institute. So what motivates this intellectual venture fund which will enable bold exploratory research, is if you step back and look at the funding situation that's going on today. So you hear a lot about how the federal funding of science is flat, or maybe declining a little in real terms. And that's true. But the worst part of that is not the absolute value of the resources being put in. The worst part of it is it makes the system incredibly conservative. That is, if you're a funding agency and you don't have many funds and there's a huge amount of competition for them, you're less likely to take risk. You want a sure thing to prove that your investment has been successful. You also, as a applier to federal funds, know that you have a much better chance if you can propose something that's sure to lead results. This, of course, is the antithesis of what's made Caltech successful. And it's not that private investments are ever going to replace, or at least not in the foreseeable future, federal funding, government monies. They're 1,000 times different in scale. But the philanthropic investment then gives you the ability to absorb risk, to try things that may not work. And it's okay, you'll probably learn something, and if it fails, that's okay. But if it succeeds, that's when you change the world. And so that's the hope. So you found new fields of science and engineering on the basis of these great ideas, and that, came out of Caltech. The formation of molecular biology came out of Caltech. A lot of observational astronomy, quasars, discovery of quasars came here. Invention of quarks came out of here. Figuring out the workings of the Earth came out of Caltech. All kinds of new ways of thinking about nature. And in some ways, we've been extraordinarily privileged in this high-risk, high-reward approach by having the more monies from that incredibly generous gift. And we need to institutionalize that and endow it. Let me talk a little bit now about science and human health. The aspiration here is to integrate an understanding of life at the most basic level with applications to medicine for the dramatic betterment of the human condition. This is an awfully busy space. That is, there are lots of places doing translational medicine, and there are lots of places, in fact, with hospitals associated with them that are doing this. So the question is, how can Caltech stand out in this space? I mean, one way, of course, is that we are incredibly strong in basic research. Another way is that we bring people together, biology and biological engineering, chemistry and chemical engineering, pure and applied science sitting right next to each other. But I think what can really distinguish us in this way is the ability to have people who move back and forth across the spectrum. Often at other institutions, you're pigeonholed. You're a basic researcher, you're a clinician. You do applications, you do basic science. But the boundaries are actually very porous. If you're starting looking at the properties of a molecule and you realize maybe it can be used to cure a disease, a lot of the people we have, of course, want to follow that trajectory all the way. But they may not want to stay in the regime of application for their whole career, move back and forth. So we need to create an environment where researchers move back and forth along this continuum. And this actually will require additional space. A new biosciences, bioengineering complex is interesting. These are often called capital campaigns. They used to be very building heavy. These days, it's really programmatic heavy. And I think of buildings and infrastructure in this way as the tools that you need to recruit the people. So in some, you won't come. If you can't have a modern laboratory in this area, you're not going to be able to accomplish what you want. And so this is one area where we need to build to be able to create the conditions where we recruit and retain the best people in this area. Okay, Quantum Science Institute. It's interesting, end of the 1800s, there were a lot of articles about the end of physics. Classical mechanics was understood. Electricity and magnetism were really understood quite well. What could come next? And of course, that was just at the start of the quantum revolution, which tells you that it is dangerous to make predictions of this sort. So the hope here is to accelerate advances at the quantum frontier, which 100 years later continues to go strong, to develop revolutionary technologies. It is, in fact, an interesting time in this regime where one has gone in terms of taking advantage of quantum mechanics in terms of discrete levels, and all your modern electronics, this computer, your phone is based on that semiconductor technology, to taking advantage of so-called quantum entanglement, which is Einstein's spooky action at a distance. And there are two areas where Caltech is incredibly well positioned and already leading the world in a lot of ways. One is quantum measurement. This goes all the way from atoms to LIGO, the interferometer looking for gravity waves, where one uses quantum mechanical measurement techniques to reduce the noise in these photons, light rays going back and forth over a kilometer. And then quantum information science, the notion of quantum computation. And the really interesting thing in quantum computation is not only the machine. I mean, one hasn't built a quantum computer. We probably will, a good one, in the next 5 to 10 years. It's nobody really knows what they're going to be best used for. And Caltech's the kind of place that can bring together applied physicists, computer scientists to think about the field in that holistic sense. Okay, this is a picture for next generation astronomy of the 30-meter telescope, not yet built, but will be built on Mauna Kea. And in a lot of ways, although people talk about the 21st century being the age of biology, it is the age of astronomy. There's an exactitude in astronomy that is remarkable and unprecedented. We know the age of the universe now, 14.7 billion years to 3 significant digits, plus or minus. 0.2 or something like that. But there's so many things that we don't know. We don't know what 95% of the universe is made up of, dark matter and dark energy. We're starting to find enormous numbers of exoplanets, planet-like objects that are orbiting faraway suns. And in fact, using a bigger telescope, 30 meters, we will be able to say intelligent things, we hope, about dark energy and dark matter, and also potentially to do spectroscopy on the atmospheres of those planets and look for signatures of life. And of course, if we found that, that would be a new Copernican revolution, talking about the place of human beings in the universe. So we need to provide intellectual leadership for this next generation instruments, and that is a challenge because we are part of a big consortium. This is a $1.5 billion project, TMT, 30-meter telescope, for an institute with a $2.3 billion endowment. So we're clearly not going to be paying for all of it. So we are partnering with sovereign nations, China, India, Japan, hopefully Canada. And so the trick here is not only to get the instrument built, it's how to think about how we retain our leading edge in this. And the other part of it, which does give Caltech a leg up on everybody else, is that we run all the biggest telescopes. We run Palomar, that's the 5-meter, was the biggest. Keck is the 10-meter, presently the biggest. TMT will now be the biggest. And it's not that we can just use each of those sequentially or historically, the biggest ones, but you can use the power of each of those to define problems at different scales and then work together to have a dominant position in the field. Seismological Observatory, these are buildings downtown LA, which are outfitted or with in the community seismic project network with sensors. And the aspiration here is to anticipate, explain, and respond to earthquakes. Notice I don't say predict earthquakes. That's not expected to be done, but we can do a lot in terms of understanding the basic science and being able to respond and once things get shaking, to be able to say intelligent things and give warning. And this comes down to a unique methodology of both the ground-based sensors, which we've developed, and also airborne sensors. So here the connection, of course, to JPL is a big deal. There's a lot of mathematical and computational work in terms of analyzing the signals, even analyzing the behavior of the Earth without waves propagating through it, by analyzing the shaking even without an earthquake. Hand in hand then with this understanding is the engineering to know how to build buildings, bridges, and so on, to be able to make people safe. And my hope here is that since we're developing these unique methodologies, is to propagate this through the world, Pacific Rim in particular, in various cities and countries. Okay, let me turn now to the last category, perspective. As you may remember, Robert Millikan, when he was talking about starting the modern day Caltech, talked about the location of Pasadena in terms of a place where pure and applied science could be brought together, which he thought of as the Caltech campus and Mount Wilson Observatory, then coupled to the best of literature and historical thought, which he then identified as the Huntington Library and Gardens. And so this notion of bringing together these types of perspectives in a broad way is woven into the DNA of Caltech. And so I want to talk about this notion of perspective with 3 examples: global environment, human behavior and humanistic inquiry, and the innovation initiative. In terms of the environment, this is arguably the most important challenge of our day, between global warming and water and energy needs. Caltech has a unique way of doing this. Again, we are famous for doing multidisciplinary research, but we don't hire energy experts, say, in that area. What we do is we hire the best in various disciplines with their expertise proven and tested in that discipline, who then have broad interests and bring them together with different perspectives to take a capacious problem like energy and work on that. And this has been extraordinarily effective. And we have the framework in place. We have the Resnick Institute. We have the Lind Center. We have JPL. We will not be raising money for JPL. That's a government laboratory. But it's a distinctive advantage in terms of the kind of data that we can get out and expertise that way. And all we have to do is raise the endowments. No problem. So now we've moved to shift to with the hope of shifting to a more sustainable world. As you may remember, Don Randall talked about, in October, systematically investing in our intellectual infrastructure across the board at every level. And this, of course, speaks to the fact that we have an ambitious effort in humanities and social sciences, and one that is integral to the success of the Institute. And there's, again, a framework that I think that exists where we can leverage historical strengths. So let me return here, going back to Millikan, to the Huntington Library. There are discussions already underway in terms of a Center for the History and Philosophy of Science, which takes advantage of the collections of the Huntington and the expertise here on campus. We don't have a very big humanities effort compared to a lot of our peers. We have an excellent humanities effort, but not very big. And there's a way, how do you get, again, critical mass? And one way we're thinking of is to select modules, various topics where we can congregate people using the Huntington, using our campus, get shared postdoctoral fellows to mediate some of the interactions. We were successful in fact, endowing one of these in collaboration with the Mellon Foundation, so you can imagine a suite of these opportunities, and visiting faculty both here and through the Huntington, and create a much broader effort in this fashion. In terms of social sciences, we actually have a special opportunity, and Jean-Laurent Rosenthal's head of HSS is much more eloquent than I am on this, but let me try a little. And that is, we're distinguished by our quantitative abilities in the social sciences. But we also have the ability, I think, given perspective, to step back and ask some of the questions about the big problems of the day. A lot of places have become extremely focused and detail-oriented in terms of a lot of the social science questions. So the idea is, and I saw this at Chicago as well, which is excellent, which is one of the centers of social science research, probably the strongest part of the university. But some of the big questions, how do societies change? So what happens? How do you predict? How do you understand big shifts like economic depressions? What leads up to that? How do you go from a social situation where everybody smokes to all of a sudden it's not acceptable at all to smoke? How do you describe this? How do you model this? Almost phase changes in a physical sense. And this is something that we can do better than other places can. And you have to look, of course, for those opportunities where you can be the best. Otherwise, it's not worthwhile competing. Okay, and of course, in the social sciences and in biology, we have a huge effort on brain mapping and connecting that to economic motivation, social neuroscience. And that requires large investments in terms of instrumentations, in terms of MRIs. Okay, so quantitative and contextual here. And finally, let me talk about innovation. What I hope we will be able to do is create a replicable national model that talks about innovation in a different way. We don't want to just become Stanford. We love the fundraising success of Stanford, but intellectually and even in terms of entrepreneurship, I think we would like to do this in a different way, consonant with our particular skills. You know that we have a highly entrepreneurial environment. The number of patents per faculty member at Caltech is twice that of either Stanford or MIT. Of course, we don't have as many faculty members, so the total amount, but we already have this environment, and we need to be able to assist it in ways that allow our faculty members to thrive. We have a good framework there, I think, in terms of CI Squared, the Caltech Innovation Initiative. We're thinking about seed funds to get from the idea stage to commercialization. We just launched an entrepreneur in residence program. We need internships and mentorship for our students, potentially an incubator located not on campus, but very close to campus. So some of those companies, we spun out 8 companies last year, stay around here, and visiting professorships in areas where we haven't built enough faculty strength. And this will both be important for student needs, but more generally impacting society. Okay, let me switch gears. How do we get there? So budget reality, if you look at the budget of the university, and we can just look at the revenues, sponsored research is an inordinate part of our budget compared to peers. It's a vulnerability. It's also a measure of the success we have in terms of the kind of research we do. But in any case, it's an area that's unlikely to grow by a large amount. Investment returns, we're doing better. But again, we're not going to expect to see some large increase in being able to do that. Tuition is laughable. We have no students to first order in a budgetary sense. So we're not like NYU, where you have 20,000 students, and if you increase by 10%, that's a significant amount of money. We could increase by many-fold, and it wouldn't affect the budget. IP has been successful in a number of times in terms of reasonably large spikes, which we then reinvest in budget, but they're unpredictable. It's like playing the lottery, so you can't count on that as a formula for moving ahead and funding these sorts of endeavors, which leaves philanthropy. And this is why philanthropy is so important in terms of thinking about the future of the Institute. Only philanthropy can drive this change. So the approach is to secure full trustee participation. And as you know, we've done a lot better this campaign already than we did last campaign, the totality of last campaign. Enhanced Associates Giving, there are only 23,000 living alums. And so we're going to need help from members of the community who care about Caltech and know what Caltech can do, but don't have a direct association with us. We have to increase alumni participation. And of course, why you're here, among many things, but is to build a pipeline. I mean, what this history, as you know at Caltech, has been almost sinusoidal. You go into a campaign, you raise more money, but then you don't have the base. You come back down, you come back up, down. We need, of course, to be in a situation where we have the pipeline, where we have the structure, where we can start at a place, go in a campaign, go to a new plateau, then go up again in the next campaign so that our successors are seeing the full benefit of the campaign. And that's what's so different and why I'm so grateful to all of you here in every way in terms of the mechanisms of this, but also the communications aspect and letting people know about the incredible opportunity that Caltech represents. Okay, this is a campaign that will emphasize people. We will invest in programs on a bold scale. And I believe the way to approach the infrastructure, again, is as a way to attract those people. And although we are not raising money directly for JPL, it is an incredible leverage point. It lets us compete as an institute in exciting areas where we'd never be competitive without the quality and excitement and potential of JPL. Okay, so the Caltech campaign, I would propose would be built on the themes of excellence, ambition, and perspective, but that's three. The additional one, of course, is resources. So we need to generate the resources to make this possible. You know the success we've had. This is an old slide, so this goes through September 30th. It doesn't include the incredible new gift from the Moores and a number of others. But just to give you the comparison, if you take out the Moore gifts, in the last campaign, there's only one Caltech. Trustee giving was $125 million. We're already by September 30th last year at $268 million. Remarkably, 75% of that was an endowment. With the Moore gift, 90% is. So it just tells you that the ethos here of bold research, unfettered, is something that our trustees really understand well, and we've been successful in making that case. And we're going to have the challenge to make that case to those of potential philanthropists who are not within the tent in the same way. 70%, right. So in terms of trustee campaign gift participation, very impressive, but a lot of upside potential. Let me talk about why endowment. And this is an interesting slide that actually comes from Ed Stolper. And so what this is a list against our competition of the amount of endowment, taking our total endowment and dividing it by the number of faculty. So you would say naively, or I would have said naively, you probably are more sophisticated, we have so few faculty, or do this with students. It works the same way, that if you divide by the number of faculty, we're in great shape, because we're so small. It's not true. So if you look at Caltech, where we are currently per faculty member, we are 12th. Okay? And we are competing against all these institutions, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, MIT, for the same people with much less resource. In fact, you can draw a line here where this crowd up here just sticks way out from the rest of us. In fact, there's a threat we'll be left in the dust. Now, we have cultural capital, which is extremely important, and people come for the environment at Caltech, the multidisciplinarity, the boldness, the intimacy, the focus. It's great, but that doesn't get you all the way there. You'll actually need real resources in terms of writing checks. If we were able to get to a $5 billion endowment, then we would sit here, which would be nicely in the pack, not at the top of it. But of course, by the time we get there, everybody else's endowment will go up. But this is the only way that we're going to get close in terms of why the campaign needs to be successful and why we need to secure resources that are relatively unfettered. So here's a summary of the kinds of monies we're talking about in terms of the initiatives I was talking that I presented. You can see this adds up to something like $2.7 billion. Don't get scared. That is not the amount of the campaign. Clearly is more than the campaign. In fact, this is all endowment. And we know that even if we do well, and we're aspirational to get 70% or 60% of a campaign rather than the usual 40% in endowment, the total endowment won't go up this much. But it gives you a sense, I think, of as we look ahead on a decade's time scale, how we can embed the campaign and get started and get ahead so that we can, in fact, secure Caltech's future in the right way. So the bottom line are audacious investments, to use the branding term here, and unparalleled returns. And I firmly believe that, in fact, we do have to offer a kind of perspective and a kind of opportunity that you can't find at any other place. So thank you for your help, and thank you for your attention, and I'd be delighted to hear your reactions, comments, emendations, criticisms. Thank you. Yes, Lori.
So a lot of the stuff that we saw up there is stuff that we already are sort of doing, and some of it is pretty brand new or more
right.
than the others. Is there a hierarchy for what you're going to
So you are asking me which of my children I love the most. Which of course I refuse to answer. But I'll answer in one. If I could do one thing here, and we will do more than one thing, it would be the graduate fellowships, because that will spread across the institute. It will make us particular in a powerful way, and it will affect both students and faculty members. But you know, we obviously have a lot of work to do in lots of different areas, and I think the key is to be able to allow people to dream and come to Caltech because they believe they can fulfill their dreams here. And so I think some combination, even if we don't get all the way there in terms of these initiatives, will preserve that kind of recruiting ability. Yeah, Kristen.
I'd like to hear a little more, if you don't mind, about the New Horizons Award and the Intellectual Venture Fund.
Right.
Because there's both intersection there and yet discrete. I can tell you that they're for different maybe life stages or structures.
Right.
A little more about.
So the New Horizons Fund is more specific, but there's clearly overlap. So you're quite right. So my notion of the New Horizons Fund was that you can pick a subset of faculty who either reach logically the end of a particular line of inquiry, or because of our incredible environment, say, my goodness, if I team up with such and such, I can do something that you know, I didn't think of. But how do you start? Mm-hmm. And so that's the notion. And how do I start refers not necessarily to an assistant professor, but it could be someone here who's been many years. And the wonderful part, of course, of Caltech is this always, what have you done for me lately? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Oh, a Nobel Prize? That's good. Now what are you doing now? And so people are always searching for this. The Intellectual Venture Fund is more generally the notion that we need bold types of experiments. And you know, you could fold, in some ways, I think what will happen, what I hope will happen is we will create a corpus of monies, which is the Intellectual Venture Fund, which then will have as subsets these sorts of more particular investments. And so I haven't structured it completely that way, but as we go forward, I mean, you're quite right, we need more clarity and more precision on that. Yeah.
I think so, there are faculty who we point to. The New Horizons Award is
right.
One of the things we talk about in terms of what some of the unique things our faculty have done. And so
that's right.
It's interesting to hear it being institutionalized in this way.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree that that's often the hook, if you will, right, for a story is to say, my goodness, here's a new area where somebody with an unexpected insight, because they have a different background, has been able to contribute. You know, I was so impressed with the Brain Initiative Awards, right? The NIH started a new Brain Initiative. I guess it's headquartered by NIH. It's cross agency, thank you, in Washington. And of the first 58 awards, 6 were Caltech investigators. So there, if you divide by number of faculty and do a percentage, you know, unparalleled. But to Kristen's point, it involved physicists, it involved chemists, it involved biologists, it involved engineers. So it was not always your most logical set of people that you would expect to be studying the brain. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Diane.
Well, as you know, a lot of us work with our alumni community, and I know
Yes.
that you've been so graciously going around and meeting with the alumni. One of the questions that keeps coming up is about the new student houses and how you
Yes.
approach that conversation. And not all of us have had the opportunity to hear your answer.
But how I'm approaching the new student houses.
Yeah.
So I had to.
We work with that audience, and so
Yes.
hearing you, I think, reflect on that a little bit.
Right. I can. So this really boils down. It doesn't take very long usually to get there as to whether this is going to be a freshman house or not. This actually came up in an amusing way. I thought at the LA, I did an event a couple weeks ago now. It's not even a couple weeks ago, 10 days ago at the LA Natural History Museum. It was a great venue, about 250, 300 people there, something like that. And so I got the question, alums are very concerned about this and view as an existential threat that we would do away with the house system, which I don't intend to do. And usually I answered by saying that my bias or predilection, which is true, is that there is real advantage to having older students mentoring younger students, which is one of the strengths of our house system. At that point, I got a bunch of applause. And I said that at that point, but you're not going to like what I say now. So you might want to hold it, which is that there are problems in the residential house system and in the culture. And we see that with John DeBerry's article and all that. Whether you think it's honor code or not, it's clear that there are issues in terms of the relative successes of the houses and some of the cultural attributes, the notion that students often the mentoring is don't go to class and take 6 classes, which is not actually a very helpful way to get the best education you can get. And so if we're going to keep a situation where older students and younger students are mixed together, then we have to address this issue, and we have to figure out within that configuration, how do we make the student experience better? And I think it's a great opportunity we have now with building the Bechtel House to have that conversation. And the alumni will want to weigh in a lot, and they should. And it's fine. They shouldn't be determinative because they're not the ones living it. But they obviously can have perspectives that are useful to hear. But it could be a rather extended and vitriolic conversation. Yes.
Along similar lines, when we visit alumni, some of them at least are concerned about the overall student experience in terms of particularly our undergraduates getting the chance to be more well-rounded.
Right.
And that can be anything from beefing up the counseling services to providing more entertainment options to giving them more social skills somehow. And,
right.
Do you see the campaign being instrumental in supporting
well,
that?
Yeah, I think part of the reason to have all our students on campus all 4 years is to create an environment where we can emphasize that. But I think, again, it's partly student culture. If you are really taking 6 or 7 courses every quarter, you have 0 time to do anything else. And it's not just going and sitting at the Huntington, which I always tell them they should do, or go to the Norton Simon. It's doing research during the academic year. So 30% of our students do research during the academic year, 90% during the summer, which is great. But if you want to do an extended project I would argue at least that you get a better experience and better skills by doing research during the year than by taking that extra course. But I do think that it's a start. I think the new center, the new Commitment Center, will be a useful gathering place to do that. And I think getting, frankly, more adult presence in the dorms and people who can do that, or houses, excuse me. I come from a different system. And can help with some of those more social aspects would be a big advantage. And now we have a problem that way because we want to maximize the percentage of our students who are able to live on campus and meet that demand. Every bed is precious, and you don't want to put many more adults in the dorms. But I think it would be good if we could get to that situation. So, but thank you for the question. It's a good one. Yeah. Judy, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about the seismological observatory.
Yes.
That you had. And you talked about the community seismic network and in
Yeah.
terms of partnerships with the Pacific Rim. I hadn't ever heard that, so.
Yeah, well, I'm going to China next week, so I guess it's on my thing. But it occurred, I mean, one of the measures of success, I mean, obviously we're building the network both in LA, or trying in LA, and up the coast through Oregon and Washington. But one of the measures of success is that if you develop an approach and a technology, that other places use it. And I do think we are in a position where we could collaborate with other big cities, and we should share the technology and then share the data. And it's one of the things when I'm in China that I want to talk about as a possibility. Now, we do some of that already, but I think there's still opportunities in that way. And it's a big problem, and presumably getting more data that way is for the benefit of everyone. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention.